All right. Hello, everyone. It is January 13th, 2021, and we are refining the backlog for the editor group. So the agenda is just to look at the issues that we've labeled for backlog refinement, and then if we have time, we'll move on to other categories and discuss. I have been labeling a few, perhaps slightly generously. They're not necessarily exactly ready for the scope of this meeting, but they were ones that I knew I wanted to talk with you both, and so we'll just look at the filter with that label. So let me share my screen and we can just look at the same thing. There we go. I'll make it a little bigger. All right, there's a few here. We'll just start top down. This one I did not add the label, so oh yes, I did.
This one
came up in the conversation. Yeah, this is a good one to talk about. So my understanding is this button doesn't, this drop down here that says text doesn't do anything.
No. It's
what
like
is it intended to do?
I have no idea. It was implemented a long time ago when I believe that it was implemented all the way in Haml view, and then we had this refactoring, and I was struggling to figure out what is it supposed to do. And I couldn't figure out that because it was like, there was just not enough connected dots there. So I just went on and just didn't connect it to anything when we refactored to view.
Okay.
And it's already about it's probably, quite a lot of time we are with this non-connected functionality, and nobody complained so far.
Yeah.
So I assume this, and it's just like intuitively, I cannot even say what it is supposed to do, really.
It looks like a file encoding preference, but I wouldn't imagine. Well, yeah, I don't know why.
It's technically, I would. The only scenario where I would assume this might be used is when if we would be rendering the binary files, and then we would switch between text and base 64 encoding. But since we do not really show binary files at all nowadays, this thing just doesn't make sense.
But yeah, it does. Well, it doesn't make sense either, because you're looking at a rendered binary file. You're not going to want to manually switch it over to view the text of that file and hand edit your binary.
It's just wild guess, and it's just like this button is really like, whatever. Right. It's exactly what it says. It's just text, nothing more. Like just placeholder.
All right. Well, this is an easy refinement then. Remove the bug. I mean, remove the button.
Yeah.
If nobody's complaining about it and there's no clear value, removing the button will be one step further to hearing about it. If it does provide value to somebody, even if it's as we discussed in Slack, even if it's a placebo effect and somebody thinks that this is doing something for them and they have an impression of what this is doing, it would be great to hear what they think the value they're getting from this is, especially since it's not getting any value. My guess is we will never hear about it again, and it'll just be a cleaner toolbar.
Yep.
And if for some reason down the road we do find a reason to switch file encoding within the editor, we certainly would have to build that anyway and scope it and plan it and understand actually what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's great. Let's say, I mean, I don't want it to linger. We're doing 13.9 planning, but this seems like the lowest of the low effort to just remove a button, especially if it's not even hooked up to logic.
Yeah, it's like weight should definitely be one, and I don't know, like we can assign it to 13.9, but it's yeah.
I mean, let's see. don't see why not. When we're looking at capacity, I will say, it's lower priority than some of the other work, but
yeah, it's something, like to switch context during the day.
yeah. I'm gonna put it as a stretch anyway and take off the backlog refinement.
The only complexity here that I would anticipate is actually the review process, because the reviewers and maintainers might freak out that we remove the button without actually explaining why we remove it. So
sure,
like the merge request has to be very clear in communicating that this is the button that has not been connected to anything.
Makes sense. That's a fun one to start with. I like that. All right. This is one I was real excited to talk about. So let's talk about disabling the Web IDE. There's some comments here that I left in the thread, but the issue that was created, I believe by a member of the community, this is not a GitLab employee, is not actually the main goal of disabling the Web IDE for this user is not to prevent people from using part of our product necessarily, but if you read the further details, it's around the fact that the Web IDE appears to be a way around enforcing GPG signing and committing to the repo without having a signed commit. So to kind of preface the conversation, I am fairly strongly against a user toggle setting in GitLab that would turn on or off the Web IDE or turn on or off web editing in general. I may be biased as the product manager for the editor group, but I don't think that's something we want to make configurable. I would much prefer to have the Web IDE support signing in some manner, if that's even possible, and we can talk about that in detail, or at least respect the settings of the project. I don't want the Web IDE to become a workaround to get around a preference that we have in our own product that says, only signed commits should be allowed, and then the Web IDE actually allows you to not have signed.
Keep in mind that this is not limited to Web IDE only, right? So, for example, it's going to be the same issue. Like you go to the repository, you open a file, and you edit there, and you technically take the same route as you would from Web IDE. So this toggle would as you mentioned would have to completely disable any editing experience that involves committing.
Yeah,
and the same goes for the REST API.
Yeah, so it's like it's just, if this is the thing for them, like depending on how large this customer is, I would just say that probably they need some other tool.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's really hard to cater for this scenario.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chad.
It says there's a repository option to only allow signed commits. Isn't the real problem that any of those methods don't respect that? Like the real fix is that the Web IDE, the single file editor, and everything else should respect to only allow signed commits.
Yeah, and I think that's the course of the conversation, and the thinking that I've taken on this is like there have been other requests to turn off the Web IDE as a way to enforce like some workflow on an organization. I'm not entertaining that right now. I feel like we should take a stance and have an opinion on that. And my opinion is that we don't want to turn off web editing altogether. But this is a very valid use case for implementing a feature that exists in our product for premium users, which is to enforce signed commits. And you cannot enforce signed commits if you are also giving the users a way around it through the web interface. So I don't know enough about signed commits and private keys and how that might work with a web editor to start solutioning here. But I think the MVC for this is definitely just having the Web IDE and any web editing, the single file editor, to respect that setting and prevent commits from being made if that setting is turned on.
This is not the first time we've discussed this. I think we had this problem before in the past, but the main problem is that in order to sign the commit, you need the private key, and you have to enter the password in order to sign it with the private key, and we don't have that in the platform. I mean, it's quite dangerous to have the private cert in the platform.
Yeah, and it seems counter to the idea of the private key to somehow have them store it on their account, right? Like that's the opposite of what we're going for.
Exactly. Can you sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just looking through this other issue, but go ahead.
Enforcing it seems like that would effectively, like if we gave an error in some central place, if to enforce this option, that would effectively just make all of the editors not work, which is maybe what we want.
I think to begin with, yes, it is what we would want.
That we could have them store a private key. We wouldn't want to do that.
I didn't see that image you're showing at the moment. So it seems GitHub has some special private certification or signing mechanism using their own private key. I mean, the user says all commits made by this are signed by a special service-wide key.
Well, that doesn't take you anywhere.
So maybe they are somehow self-signing commits coming from Legit's users using their own private key.
That is an interesting approach. I would need to look into that. This is signatures automatically added both for PR merge commits and changes. Because of that, it's possible to verify such commits in a cloned repo after downloading a public GPG key for no reply. Well, there's certainly a little bit more background and research on whether or not we could have signed commits from the web editors. Would that be something we would need some collaboration from another stage on? Like, could we chat with somebody?
I think it's source code.
Source code?
Yeah. But I agree that this is quite dangerous, because after we implement this kind of setting for projects, somebody will say, hey, this is quite tedious. I want a setting for my group and the projects inside that group in order to enable them all. So I think that the right approach is to fix this or implement this.
Okay. What I will do is there are several related issues that I linked here. Most of them are closed. This is the open one that we were just looking at, which is assigned to code review. I will chat with them about who would be best to implement this and what the priorities could be there. It's obviously been around for a while. This issue is created 3 years ago. It's not the maybe most pressing thing, but I'll probably close this issue referencing the other one about supporting signed commits. In the meantime, I don't have a project that I can set up that is that would enforce this setting to test out the behavior of the single file editor in Web Ide. I remember seeing something on Slack that implied that maybe the single file editor already behaves appropriately, but the Web Ide does not. So I think
you can do it in the GitLab repository. You can create a branch and commit to that branch using the single file editor.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll give that a try. And then if there's a discrepancy or like I think in the meantime, before we implement this, it'd be great if we could display an error in the Web IDE and just say, maybe just disable the commit button.
That can be also quite dangerous. Unless we really want to enforce this, because there might be complaints by people using this, or even changing a file and they are getting this error.
Mm-hmm. So the issue in question mentions that this is only available in premium and higher. I believe that there's a a setting for rejecting commits when they're not signed through GPG. So I think while an error might be annoying, we would be going against the spirit of that setting by allowing a commit from the
But
Web IDE.
I think this is a good caveat. I mean, if that users really want to prevent non-signed commits from going to the repository, he can enable that.
Mm-hmm.
Although he might not be in the right tier to have this push rule. But if the push rule is enabled, the Web IDE will fail.
That's what I'm looking for. Yeah. And I just don't have one set up, or I didn't set one up before this meeting to discuss to verify the behavior. But my opinion is that if this setting is configured and turned on, the Web IDE should not be able to commit until it is able to commit signed commits. So there's probably two issues. One, that is going to take a little more research and investigation into whether we can do signed commits online, on the web, and then there's a second issue for just making sure that the Web IDE is not a workaround for this setting. I also will try and find out how many installations are actually trying to do this. That could help us figure out priority and how widespread this might be, how many people might run into this issue. I'm not sure that exactly where that's instrumented or if it is, but we'll try and find out how many installations are enabling this setting. So that'll be the outcome there. So takeaway for me is I'm going to respond to this issue. So we're not interested in disabling the Web IDE, but we will respect the setting and prevent it from committing when that setting is turned on. And we will follow up about the signed commits in the web UI, which sounds like GitHub has figured out. So we can take some inspiration. The next one. Combine review and commit tabs into one.
Yeah, this is something that was bugging me like for forever, technically. And this is more like, user experience thing that technically when you're there are two scenarios where when you get to Web IDE, first you're about to edit the source code. The second one is you're about to review the merge request. The problem is that in both scenarios, we show three tabs, like as it's shown on the screen. We show edit, we show review, and we show commit tabs. The problem is that when you're editing a merge request, or you're editing a repository, a review tab doesn't make sense. at all. Like, what do you do in the review? You don't review anything. It's for merge request. So when you're done with editing your source code, in the edit tab, you click commit and you switch jump over to commit tab right away. When you're reviewing a merge request, you're getting to the review tab right away. And in this case, the commit tab makes no sense at all because there is nothing to commit when you're reviewing merge request. So my idea was that we might somehow, in a smart way, combine the review and commit tabs, because technically they provide pretty much similar information. The only difference being that on the commit tab, we show only the differences, like the change list. And in the review tab, we show the full tree of the repository. So I was thinking about like combining these two things, because every tab that we have to load takes resources. It affects performance. It affects user experience, because those tabs just are very confusing. Like review tab in the editing process and the commit tab in the reviewing process. So I was thinking about combining those things, but then Michael answered there, and I think we might get into the discussion on how to do this, how to do these things, because from his response, I still don't agree that we need to have to keep those tabs. Like at minimum, I think we have to remove review tab when we are editing, and we can remove commit tab when we are reviewing, because we know from the router what action we are about to do in the Web Ide. But we'll get to this discussion, and probably it's going to take a couple of rounds of discussing these things before we will be able to mark it as ready for development, or just discard this issue.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up and for thinking through the UX there, and just to, I don't know, demonstrate and make sure I understand fully what you're saying. So if I've got a merge request here, I'm going to see that I've made changes and I'm reviewing them. I go to edit them.
Okay. Yeah.
Like I get the diff view, right? And
you get the diff view. If you go to the third tab to the commit, you still get the diff. But in this case, it's broken diff, because it's not like kind of really working diff. And this tab just doesn't make sense at all when you're reviewing the things, because you're not about to commit anything. And the same thing, if you're editing the source code, the review tab doesn't make sense.
Whereas if I'm following your logic, the idea behind the commit tab and the review tab is similar, except for the context that the user is coming to the Web IDE, given each
so if you task. Yes. So we at every moment of time, we do know whether you're in the review process or you're in the edit process, because the URL tells us that information. So we can have the combined view for commit and for the review. Like even the button commit doesn't make sense when you're reviewing the merge request. So we have to be much smarter about conditionally showing the elements on the screen to the users, depending on that or another context. And this technically comes to our discussion of the in-context editing as the whole in the project. So the commit view shows pretty much the same diff editor, with exception of the left navigation bar being dedicated for the change list instead of the full navigation tree. But this, again, can be conditionally loaded as well. So that was my idea here.
Yeah, I mean, I like the thought. I'll read through Michael's response again, or in more detail, and add some additional thoughts. I think preserving, or I should say, catering the UI and the experience in general to the context, given that we know the context, as you mentioned, sounds valuable to me. I think understanding a little more about the different use cases coming from a merge request and reviewing versus someone maybe more like me, where I might jump in from the merge request to make an edit and a further commit, could help us explore some of the nuances to the experience that you're talking about for in-context editing. So,
Yeah.
something like,
just
the difference between I'm reviewing the diffs versus I'm actually just coming in to make further edits to
make like, and this has a really like a really smooth implementation path using very minimal changes. Like we can start with just to kind of measure the to gauge the interest in these changes. So we can just hide these tabs for when you're editing the content. We hide the review tab so that users cannot get to it. And when you're reviewing the merge request, we hide the commit tab and the commit button. And then we just check whether anybody complains about this. Because in this case, we do preserve the same naming that people got used to. So it could be enough for us. The main thing that I want to avoid is to get this confusion that technically in every context, we have 3 tabs. So probably each of them has some value, but one of them is constantly broken because it just doesn't work in that or another context.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that preventing people from committing if you're coming from the merge request could be potentially dangerous for the workflow that I just described, which is like I'm going in here to add additional information to this release post or whatever. Like that path I just took to get here is one that I take frequently, and whether it's right or wrong, it's something I do sometimes if I need to like add an extra line or just change a word. I don't necessarily want to do it from the suggestion in context of the MR, which is what I mean by like we should explore that further and in our effort to bring in context editing into the merge request. But
this is the important thing here to keep in mind that what I suggest does not prevent you from doing what you just described. So the edit tab will be available in every scenario. So you get to the review tab, but the edit button, edit tab will be there all the time. So you will still be able to edit the things. The question is, how do we reveal the commit tab if you do make changes while reviewing an MR, right? But then again, we do have the state that tells us whether we have changes or not. So if you're in the review, if you get straight to the review process, we show only 2 tabs, edit and review. Then you want to do the change. You go to the edit tab, make change, and our state tells us, okay, we do have the change. Then we reveal the commit tab. We reveal the commit button, and you are free to make your commit. That's it.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
by default,
I think I misunderstood because I thought you said that we would just allow reviewing but not committing. What you were getting at is not show the commit tab that you can still commit from this view.
That was about like the default state of how people, in my opinion, how people interact with Web Ide. Like if they review, they review. If they edit, they edit. It's the only scenario where you edit the file while reviewing is when you review your own merge request. In most cases, but that doesn't happen that often. Like usually you do review your merge request before you push it to reviewers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the legacy of the decision-making process here, but it feels like the commit tab is a little bit left over from when we staged files and had a little more file management and stuff in general. I definitely can see your standpoint here on the fact that they're performing similar options. It seems like to me, if I could simplify the distinction, it's really just about what you could combine them into one tab and just provide different options for what you're viewing. Like, are you viewing only the files that are changed, or do you want to see all the files? Are you reviewing the changes since your last commit, or the changes since the the merge diff
the merge
target
request.
branch?
Yeah.
And then, so like, in oversimplifying it again, like if you just had a default view for the review tab that just showed only the files that were changed, essentially what we show in the merge request itself, and then had a button to show all files and like toggle between that, it seems like it would negate any value that the commit tab has in general in this context.
Yeah,
so I'm with you. Yeah, let's.
So the main idea is to provide as simple interface as possible to people who are executing the default action. But then when users explicitly require, like, do some action that would require us to extend the interface, this is like the user-driven extension of the interface, and that's something that users know. Okay, I make this action, this thing happens. Okay, that's cool. But if users are we throw everything we have at a user right away, that's a bit overwhelming, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it needs a little more back and forth, like you said, with Michael, and let's get it. Let's get the proposal crystal clear before we try and schedule it. But I mean, I'm all for iterating on the UX and simplifying the overall experience. I think he had mentioned a couple concerns about just in general, like providing visual feedback on the commit tab. I think really what we're talking about is ultimately combining the two tabs and have them serve dual purposes depending on the context. But the MVC for hiding one or the other could potentially make it so, the utility of that commit tab where it shows the number of files is lessened in the near term. But I think we can let's take a look at some of the alternate proposals, go back and forth and get a couple of designs. I don't have any real reservations to moving forward on this. I think in general, it makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Thank you.
I'm gonna leave without saving that change so I don't mess up my release post, and I will leave this open so I can go back and make some comments. So this was the other one I was looking forward to talking about. I'm excited about this one because I have a big question about editor config. Paul brought this one up in an issue that was assigned for 13.8, which seemed like a small bug, which was that the single file editor doesn't add the trailing new line character when it commits the file, the changes to the file, but the Web Ide does by default. And in talking through that behavior, we kind of realized that the reason Web Ide can do that is because you can override that behavior if you want to through the editor config. If we extended the single file editor to have the same default behavior, but don't let the editor be configured to not add the new line value, you would never not be able to have, if you catch my double negative, like you would always have a new line at the end of your file. And anytime you edited with single file editor, it would add it back in. You could get an assert. If you didn't want that new line for some reason, whether it's a file encoding or your personal preference, you would be stuck in a circular editing loop until you got so frustrated that you edited it somewhere else. So my opinion is the solution here is that the single file editor or editor light as a whole, because I don't understand still quite where the distinction is on where the behavior would be added, but if the single file editor can reference the editor config values, then it can behave consistently with the Web IDE. We can default to adding the new line character and allow people to create the editor config file to override that behavior if they want to. And then there'll be consistency between the two editing experiences. So is this something that we would build into Editor Lite to reference the editor config file, or is this
Sure.
something that's inherent to the two actual implementations of it?
No, this, I think Himanshu answered in this issue, and it like really implementation of editor config in Web IDE is just like we just make the API call. That's it. We make the API call, we get the config, we're done. It can be and it will be the part of the Web IDE extension for Editor Lite right now when we are moving to Editor Lite, but nothing really prevents us from making it like part of the core extension, for example, so that whenever we use Editor Lite, this is available for the users, and every instance of Editor Lite will use it. So there is no complexity here. Yes, right now we have similar different implementations of Editor Lite in single file editor and Monaco, technically, because there is no Editor Lite in Web IDE yet. We are working on that only. So yeah, these are different things, but it's going to Editor like Web IDE goes to Editor Lite. The whole Web IDE will be wrapped in an extension, and then we can just dissect that extension and decide what parts of Web IDE implementation are valuable for the overall editing experience across the whole product, and just make it the core extension. That's it.
Yeah, I'm generally all for that. My question here is, given the reach of the Editor Lite that we imagine, are there editing experiences where we wouldn't want to respect the editor config values? Like, given that snippets uses the same editor, the presence of snippets implies a separate repository, so it would potentially not be looking for the same editor config, and so maybe it wouldn't.
Well,
exactly.
Yeah.
Those could be two different repositories. One, I mean, you can still add a editor config file in your snippet repository.
Mm-hmm. Would yeah, okay. And then I guess same thing goes for wiki. If we had a code view separate from our rich text editor on wiki, and we wanted to use Editor Lite as that code view, it could have a separate editor config. Same thing goes for static site editor down the road. Also,
there is the pipeline authoring using Editor Lite, right? So, and the alternative is we can also make it sort of choosable, or like optional for the users. So we can allow users to just run the command in their editor instance and load the editor config whenever they want. Or we can make this available on a per instance basis. So using the editor config is going to be put into the separate extension, and then every instance of Editor Lite will, like the author of every instance of Editor Lite will be able to say, okay, do we need this extension or not? That's it.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah, that's good. I think the simplest answer for right now, is that it sounds like building a core extension for reading the editor config values into Editor Lite is the path we should explore right now. And then as we implement that, and as we find other scenarios where we want more flexibility or inconsistencies seem odd, we can look into ways to either surface like a message in snippets that says you can create an editor config file to change the behavior of snippets or something like that. Some of this might just be documentation as well.
Yeah, it's but as I said, this is really trivial thing. Like this can like fetching editor config and applying it can be made an extension already tomorrow, and we will have it in 13.8. But it's just a matter of creating the extension. That's it.
You could also give them.
Denise,
like,
sorry. Go ahead, Chad.
I was saying you could also give them an option somewhere in the project or instance settings to say, here is the editor config I want to use, and then across all of the different features, it will use the same one.
Yeah.
Assuming they want the same formatting, they might not.
Yeah, well, whatever, like whether we allow users to decide on editor config for different projects, or like use project-wide editor config, or like different set of configs, using like creating the extension for dealing with editor config will be beneficial, because we will be able to specify what editor config to use on that or another instance, whether to use it at all, and it's just going to be flexible.
So you said you could have it tomorrow. So that means it's probably like you said it's fairly trivial, a 1 wait or something like that.
Man, don't catch me on my words. No, I mean like okay. I suppose we can have it tomorrow. We can have.
I'm
the
not saying you
request.
need to have it. I'm not saying you need to have it tomorrow. Although that's funny.
I mean,
that's what I. But
yeah,
is
like,
it 1 or 3?
Oh, it's definitely not 3. It's going to be 1, because it is like in the POC for the Web Ide running on Editor Lite. We don't have this branched into the extension. Like it's global extension for Web Ide, obviously, but we can take it out there. And the only thing that I have to think through, we don't have the paradigm of the core extensions yet. I was thinking about this for quite some time, because we will have to at some point create this core extension that is going to be used by all the editors in the project. And this is one way of doing this. Another way of doing this is, as I said, like to just create this regular extension that we do support now, and then add it as dependency for Web Ide and for the single file editor. And this is very trivial to do indeed.
Okay. The only reason I'm asking is because we were doing planning for 13.9 and getting the Web IDE using Editor Lite is one thing that's slated for 13.9. So if you could take care of it at the same time, that would be great.
Yep.
I could put this I could see this as a stretch goal for 13.9 and waiting for 13.10. I don't think it's critical. So as long as it's on our radar for,
I think we can handle it during that process, because I've already got a couple of merge requests towards this goal merged, but the main thing, like the main extension, is not prepared as the merge request yet. So I can just create two extensions, really, like one for editor config and one for the remaining part of the Web Ide.
Sounds good. So I just made a note. As far as like implementation goes, I'll leave it up to you. If there's no concept of core extensions now, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If as you mentioned, you just create an extension for both single file editor and Web IDE within Editor Lite that respects the editor config, I think that achieves the same goal, and we can move towards a core extension that has that consistently across all instances of Editor Lite. That makes sense to me. I think that's enough. We can tentatively schedule this for 13.9 and discuss the details in the issue later.
Cool.
And this was a fun one. I'd like to discuss this one. How late does this meeting go? Oh, we still have half an hour. So this one came up as a customer request. So we had a customer who was on a trial of Premium and invested some time in building a group wiki, which is only available in Premium. They did not buy Premium. I don't know if they went on a free tier or a lower tier, but regardless, the data exists, but they have no more access to it because their trial ended. They wanted to be able to retrieve it. They were justifiably confused and a little upset that they couldn't get to the work that they had put into it. From a product standpoint, from a pricing and tiering standpoint, I don't necessarily want to make a group wiki data available to somebody who hasn't paid for the tier that has that feature. But I do think that granting read-only access to that data is important so they can retrieve it. And so that if they ever upgrade, it's there for them. If they upgrade their plan and the group wiki comes back just as they had it, that would be the ideal solution. I believe this could be handled through support for now. We don't necessarily need to do anything here. The support could get access to that data and find a way to make it available for the user. And that's the path that this will take immediately. But I'd like to discuss just, for backlog refinement reasons, like not saying we need to do this in 13.9, but is there a way we could solve this a little more elegantly for self-serve that doesn't make the user feel inconvenienced for not buying Premium, because it's not for everybody. We don't want to make them feel bad about it, but still gives them access to the data in a way that doesn't require interfacing with support. So my thoughts here are in the proposal, whether this is done through the UI or through, just get access to the repo or something like that through the API and command line. I'm interested. I saw, Fran, you commented a couple, yesterday, and I don't know if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah. So at first, I thought that allowing the read-only access to the wiki, to the group wiki, would be a good solution, but that would only allow users to read the wiki, not download the wiki. We don't have any functionality to download wiki repositories compared to the functionality that we have with projects. Projects has functionality to download them. So the problem is that, and we have all the tools we need. To bundle the Git repository is done by an RPC call to Gitali. So we just need to tell Gitali to bundle the wiki repository. But if we do this through the UI, it will require UX. It will require to add new Rails routes, which in this case will be complicated because of how wikis works. So my recommendation would be, as like we have for projects, we have an endpoint called export, I think. It would be to add an endpoint, a new endpoint to group wikis and also wikis, if we want, to download them. If you have, or read access or download code wiki access. It would be more straightforward than a UI approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I think as far as like,
besides, sorry to interrupt you. Besides, if we let the user to access through the browser to their read-only wiki, we maybe as a company, and because they are not in the right tier, maybe we don't want them to access, or we don't want the wiki to be available to anyone if the wiki was public. Maybe we don't want that functionality if they aren't in the tier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, from a product and tiering perspective, like I'm not trying to be vindictive for anybody that downgraded or didn't extend a trial, or didn't pay for the same plan that their trial was on. But like the reality is, like, we've got a premium feature, and to make it available even in a read-only way to those that don't pay for the feature erodes the value for those that do, and makes it harder to manage. I mean, honestly, it's just going to be more complex. As you mentioned, from the UI standpoint, we're going to need to do more validation, and I don't know. I think API access to export the data is the simplest path to making sure that people have access to what they created, while not complicating the tiered pricing that we have in place. So until we invest more time and thought, and if this comes up a lot more, I could see us exploring a way to, for example, check the existence of group wiki data. And if you don't have access to group wiki, we could have a way in the UI to let users clone that to a new project and make a project level wiki that they can then access and edit. But the same thing could be accomplished by just letting them download the data and then do that manually. So yeah, I think option 2 makes a lot of sense. Read-only access to export the data through the API, and then we document it for support and for anybody that is searching for it in the docs. So if that's the preferred. Oh, that didn't work. Markdown. No, I'm not a robot. I just type fast. Okay. It's not the highest priority. This came up once in the past month, so I'm not saying we drop everything and do this. We'll keep it in the backlog. What do you think as far as complexity for waiting? Like,
I think we have all the tools we need. I mean, Italy works with repositories, so it doesn't work with projects or Gitly, or groups or whatsoever, only with repositories. So I think we can connect all the gears quite quickly and say, Gitly, bundle me the group wiki repository, and it will return it. And we can even reuse some code that we have in the project export endpoint. So I think it will be quite straightforward.
cool. Given the documentation and stuff, I'm hearing like a 3, but if you think it's
maybe
less,
yeah.
All right, let's just say 3 for the purposes.
I think it will be less.
Okay.
But if we have any unexpected situation, let's give it a 3.
Okay, well, that helps. I will update the description in a little more detail to take out the references to the other options and make it more clear what we're doing. And then I'll take off the backlog refinement label and we'll get it prioritized. File. Moving on. The file context path for the Gitpod button is not updated when browsing the repository. Oh yeah, I remember seeing this one. So the gist of this one is that when you are browsing through the hierarchy of your repository and you click on the Git pod button, it will always load the root of the project, if I remember correctly.
I think no. I think the problem is that if you are in an inner route and you open Gitpod, it takes you to the main route, not to the folder that you might be browsing at that moment when you open Gitpod.
Yeah, right. So if I'm in, I don't GitLab, yeah, Gitpod's enabled here. So if I'm in, app, controllers, import, whatever, and I want to open this in Gitpod, it's going to take me to the root app level. This is what it says.
Yeah, the problem is that technically what happens is that the button doesn't generate the link based on all the URL mutations. So technically, when you get to the root of the repository and then drill down to the subfolder, then we do update the URL, but we do not reload the page. So technically, we using the history API in the browser to push these states, but the URL of the button doesn't get updated. Contrary to that, if you reload the page, then the button is initialized with the URL that is on the page, and then it shows the correct URL. So technically, it's just a matter of I don't know. Listening to the history changes, or that might make more sense, just generate the URL the moment the user clicks the Gitpod button. So the user clicks the Gitpod button, we do identify where we are in the repository structure, and that's what we send to Gitpod. Probably that's going to be like, instead of constantly listening to all the changes in the URL, that would create a lot of noise in the front end on the client. So we just generate the URL.
This.
I'm sorry?
I can't reproduce this. When I click into the app directory, it updates my button without reloading the page.
Nice. Then probably it's
favorite kind of bug. Let's see. Oh man.
Yeah, you need to be logged in.
Well, I'm just hovering over and looking at the link. I'm assuming that the link is where it actually goes. You don't actually have to
we just have to make sure that we didn't reload the page before getting here, right? So that if we could test this once again, so drilling down from the, oh, okay.
Cool. Well, let's verify it. But the link does look right. You're right. So
yeah, go to
back
app
out, and I mean, well, yeah, let's go into a JavaScript file.
Right. So we do get updated URL, but this happens without reloading.
So without reloading, let's see if it lets me start up now.
It shows that it doesn't.
It's using the old URL.
Yep. Yeah, you can see app controllers import.
Yeah. So you were navigating back and forth, but the URL hasn't been updated for the button. So I just suggest we can attempt to generate the URL before we get to the Gitpod, before we send the user to the Gitpod. Probably. I don't know. I might say some nonsense now.
So your button didn't update when you clicked on that?
Did not.
Your
We'll never
buttons are in a
not
different
do
order
this.
than mine. I wonder if like I have GitPod integrated a different way. My GitPod button is on the right.
Are you using like a
What?
browser extension or something?
I think, I don't know, I just followed some instructions. I think it's like turn it on in the settings somewhere maybe? It was a while ago.
It's the button that either allows you to open the repository in Web Ide or in
Yeah,
GitPod.
I don't have that drop down one.
Because probably you don't have the Gitpod set up for. I don't remember whether it's per user or per project actually.
I think I must have, yeah, it must be the browser extension that I'm seeing.
Oh man, that's that's not a representative test.
All right, so the potential, the proposal is that we send the right path to Gitpod, which is, yeah, that I agree. How we do that, I think we'll need to test whether or not we can do that at the time they click. I don't think this is hugely important. I'm not going to add it to 13.9, but it's good that we diagnosed it.
Well, it's really. I would suggest putting it into the 13.9 because it's not a rocket science to implement it. But I suspect that a lot of people do use Gitpod, and it might be a bit annoying for them. I'm not sure whether we have any statistics on how many people do open repositories in Gitpod, but I've heard a lot of praising that GitLab offers Gitpod integration, and probably it would be nice to
It's
fix
fair.
this.
I mean, it's certainly nice to have. 13.9 is looking a little heavy, but
just as a stretch or something.
yeah, I think
don't
as
know.
a stretch, it works. All right. If not, it can be 13.10 if that's the definition of a stretch goal.
And we can assign it to Fran. I'm sure Fran will be happy to do front end stuff.
He has about half that list.
As always, I have
tentatively
front-end
assigned to him. Yeah, there's a good amount of work on your plate here coming up, Fran. So glad you're back.
I'm not sure I can say the same, given the amount of work.
All right, so last one on the list, and then we can just wrap because we're right about at time. Use one editor in multiple instances for multifile snippets. This one had been sitting around for a little while, and I think I added the backlog label because I just wanted to understand the benefits and complexity here.
Yes. So I think Fran will let you know more about it. Like, Editor Lite is his thing. But okay. So we for multifile snippets we do use Editor Lite, right? Fair enough. The way it is implemented now is a bit inefficient because if let's say we have 10 files in a snippet, we do create 10 different editors for one editor per file. However, Editor Lite allows and actually it suggests that the most optimal way is to create one global editor and then create one instance per file instead of one editor per file. That way we can share some settings, some configurations, we can share some instances and so on and so on. So this issue is really about, like, it's not a bug, it's not a thing, it's just like the minor change to architecture to optimize the performance and optimize the memory consumption when editing the snippets. It's primarily about editing the snippets. That's it.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't do it. Do you think, I mean, I don't know. We need to get a better sense of exactly the reach of multi-file snippets at this point, and I know it's instrumented, so I need to run the latest numbers, but
from my perspective, it can sit in the backlog for as long as we need to.
Yeah, I can see this coming up again in that discussion for in context editing. If we potentially have multiple files in an MR and we're instantiating editor light in that view, you might
Not
have
really.
No.
No, like it. Yeah, it might the same thing. Like it will. This discussion will be. We will get back to only in the case we are on the view of the multifile snippet, and a user wants to edit several files at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, user edits one file at a time. This means that we create the instance of the editor. And we create the global editor, we create the instance for this file, and that's pretty much it. And then the user clicks another file, and we create instance for that file. We do not. So technically, if we have to solve this for the view, this might be another issue. These two can live separately, no problem there. And when we start implementing the in-context editing for the snippet view, we will implement it correctly right away. So we will create one global editor and every one instance whenever user requests the inline editing. But that won't fix the editing form, but at the same time, the editing form won't affect that implementation by any means.
Cool. All right, well, I'll continue to gather that data. I don't know how I would quantify the performance benefit here for those users that might be doing that, but I think it's relatively small in reach that we can keep it on the backlog for a little while, like you said.
It's about editing form, like performance. When it comes to performance of the views and the editing forms, users usually have different expectations and different perception of performance for these things. So like shaving off, I don't know, like 100, 200 milliseconds on the edit form won't give us any praise for performance improvement.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, thanks for elaborating.
Is this used anywhere else already, like in the Web IDE, to have the single editor with multiple instances?
Let's start with the fact.
Is it worth dog fooding it maybe on snippets, something that's not as widely used? Another reason to prioritize is higher.
Okay, you're opening a really, really dark Pandora's box now. So, Editor Lite allows you to fundamentally the way we do it in Web IDE, or we are about to do this because Editor Lite. Web IDE is not Editor Lite driven yet, right? There is only the POC for that. But let's assume that Web IDE is running on Editor Lite. So fundamentally, architecturally, multifile snippet and Web IDE will be implemented a bit differently because for the multifile snippet, we really need to create multiple instances because we visually see different editors, different instances on the page. While with Web IDE, I'm doing it a bit smarter, and we are reusing only one instance there. And what we do there, we switch the modals. So there is one level deeper abstraction kind of. So we have one instance in the Web IDE. So we do not, and this is the merge request that got merged today, actually. We do not throw away the resources when switching the files or something. We just create new modal for like you click on a file in the navigation tree. If this file hasn't been opened yet, we create the Monaco modal and put it into the already existing instance of the editor. Then you open another one, we create the modal and swap the modals in existing instance. We do not discard the instance. The only moment we discard the instance is when you close the last file in Web IDE, so the last tab in the editing interface. But otherwise, these are they will be implemented a bit differently. Like the multifile snippets use really multiple instances, while Web IDE uses one instance but multiple modals that get into this instance. So if if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. So the only point I was making is if we are planning to do, or when we're planning to do this for issues or MRs, the same architecture, it might make sense to do it on snippets first as a dogfooding in a less used and less important part of the app.
Yeah, if we're ever going to introduce editor light for merge requests for the changes tab of merge requests, then obviously it's going to be the same principle, like one instance per changed file. But I think we have really a long way before that that happens.
The other thing I could think of, again, very far in the future, but something we've talked about with the static site editor, with the complexities of some of these pages where you might have embedded code in your content. We have potential to identify code blocks of template layout or like mermaid diagrams or whatever, and show those in a like code block embedded editor, right? So in a potential for like a handbook page that's very complex, you might have 3 or 4 or 5 of these spread out throughout the page, maybe more. It would be beneficial to instantiate one editor and then, or to have one instance of the editor, or multiple instances of one editor is what I'm trying to say. Yeah,
exactly.
So, but again, that's pretty far in the future. I think that that helps me understand this issue a lot better, but certainly keep it in the backlog and keep it in the back of my mind for when we get closer to that kind of interaction. I think that's the end of our list. We didn't have time to go deeper into any other categories, but I got a lot of issues refined in my mind. Thank you, as always, for your input. Anything? Oh, we're right at time, but we've got a few minutes before my next one. If there's anything else you wanted to chat about.
Yeah, regarding the geo issue that you mentioned yesterday, and group wikis, I read the last comment, and I think they said that they were going to tackle it, not us.
No, they're going to make space for helping. So they want it to be self-serve. Like we take our best stab at it, and if we need assistance, they're there to help.
Okay, so I think because they tackle snippet completely, because they are building this framework for geo resources. So maybe they want to try teams to be on their own the geo resources using their framework. So it's not going to be as straightforward as I thought, because we are going to deal with the framework, but at least we have something to compare, like snippets.
Yeah.
And now I don't have anything else to chat, Dennis.
We can definitely talk about that more on our next refinement issue, or just in the issue itself. But they are making themselves available to help, but they would like us to see through the work.
Perfect.
Great. Well, again, thank you. And Roman will be back starting next week, and he'll be back to running these on our next session, but it's been fun trying to understand what I'm talking about the past couple ones. So thanks for humoring me. Have a good rest of your day, everyone, and I'll see you on Slack.
Yep.
Bye.
Talk to you.
See you, everybody.